Law and procedure, hey, they go hand in glove, and much of what happens in a legal case is governed by procedure. Where do you sue? Who do you sue? What happens after you sue? What court can hear the case? How can a case be appealed? That's all governed by complex rules of procedure. Well, that takes us to this week's case. It involves a relatively straightforward set of facts. It's a man, he was serving in the military. He was stationed in Great Britain for a period of time, and there he met a woman. They got married, they had a child. He was then sent to Afghanistan. He's serving in Afghanistan. The woman remains in Scotland. After he completed the service in Afghanistan, he came back to the United States, settled in Alabama. She joined him in Alabama. But after a while, well, unfortunately the marriage didn't go well. He sued for divorce. She returned to Scotland. He, however, forbid her to take their child with her. So, he maintained full custody of the child in Alabama. She sued. And this is where now it gets somewhat complex, because she sued under the Hague Convention. Now, the Hague Convention is basically a set of rules that's agreed to by various nations governing what takes place when something like this comes up. And what this particular case required, according to the Hague Convention, was that if somebody who is living apart from their child and wanted the child to be returned to their native land needed to sue in the country where the child was, and the court there had an obligation to return the child to its native land. In this instance, the woman argued that the child should be returned to Scotland by virtue of the fact it was born there, it was raised there. It had only spent a short period of time, relatively, in Alabama. Well, she sued in a U.S. District Court, and the U.S. District Court, looking at the Hague Convention, agreed and ordered that the child should be returned to Scotland. The child went back to Scotland. But the man said, you know what, I disagree with the way in which this case was decided, and I want to appeal it. I want to appeal it. And so he launched his appeal through his attorneys. Now here's where something very interesting happened that will not happen in 99.99999% of child custody cases. This case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court and was heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. And there the U.S. Supreme Court listened to the arguments. And the arguments on one side for him was that he disagreed with what the trial court did and he had a right of appeal. On the other side, her attorneys argued, hey, doesn't make any difference. All of that is over and done with. It's moot because the child's gone back to Scotland and there's nothing to decide anymore. So let's just forget about it. Nothing for the court to decide is a moot issue and we need to move on. Guys arguing, I have a right of appeal, I have a right of appeal, I have a right of appeal. Well, the Supreme Court heard this, and they carefully considered it. They looked at the Hague Convention and they said there's nothing under the convention that prohibits an appeal under the laws of the nation where the case was brought. Therefore, we are going to allow the appeal pursuant to U.S. law, and you, sir, can go forward with your appeal. And that was the decision that was made. The case hasn't fully resolved, but the man did have an opportunity to continue with the case and bring an appeal. So what do we learn from this? Well, basically, we learn a very simple thing, that in many ways, whether or not somebody has a case or doesn't have a case is dependent upon the rules of procedure. The rules of procedure are very complex, but they do provide what happens. Can you appeal? Can't you appeal? And when there are issues, how are those issues resolved, even regarding an appeal? Okay, we bring you this case as we bring you cases every week so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.